Hey everybody, welcome back to part 6 of CSS Noob to Ninja. We're going to take a look at a couple of things. We're going to take a look at styling list items. What are lists? Why would you use them? And then this will also segue into a talk about semantics in general. So let's say that you have a navigation. Okay, so it might seem normal to do something like div id equals nav. And then within the div you could have your links, right? Home. And then you could simply duplicate this and, I don't know, if you're just building a static site, about, portfolio, contact. You can get away with this. So let's go into Firefox, refresh the page, and that's how it displays by default. You'll even see people who try to create the dividers in the markup. So they'll do something like, you'll see this often, something like that, or they might try to be clever, and don't ever do this. Put their dividers outside of it, something like that, and technically you can get away with it, but this is really bad form, and you don't want to actually be adding presentation and things like that into your markup. Your CSS can do that really easily with borders. So let's take that out, but let's see what also is wrong with this. There's a couple things. One of them is the name of semantics. Semantics is serving its perfect purpose. So in this case, we have a list of navigation links. Well, why are we not taking advantage of an unordered list? The list element is specifically to display a list of items. So in this case, we have a list of links, but we're not putting them in a UL. That's unsemantic. So instead, what we could do is turn this div into a UL, and then simply wrap each of these within list items. Right? And let's just close this out, and I think there's a way in TextMate, by the way, if you hold down Option, you can type like that. Well, maybe not. How strange. Anyhow, if we go back, refresh the page, now we have a list of links. So it might require a little bit more styling, but the advantage is this is much more semantic because we have a list of links. We're going to use an unordered list. Subsequently, if you have something like 5 reasons why NetTuts is awesome. In this case, you could do the exact same thing where you would do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and put each of those maybe in a span tag or in a paragraph tag. In this case, they're all going to show up in a line like that. But again, if we're displaying an ordered list of reasons for something, we need to be using an ordered list. So the difference between an OL and a UL is with ordered lists, the order matters. And actually, you can get rid of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 because by default, the list item will automatically have the order. So 1, 2, 3, and so forth. And what you'll see here is it actually doubles up those numbers, as you can see there. So this would be your first item. But again, this is more semantic because we're using an ordered list. If there's an element specifically made for a purpose, there's absolutely no reason why you should not be doing that. So let's go back to Firefox and let's take a look at, we can get rid of this OL. Let's take a look at how you would begin styling these. So let's go ahead and style this. So we'll say nav and set a background color, something easy to see. And now if we want our menu items to display horizontally like a menu, you can set them to float left or display inline. Okay? So in this case, we're going to float them to the left, and I'm going to do this so that you can see, watch what happens to the red background. It disappears. So why is that? And this is something I go over often because it really confused me. When you float all of the children within a parent, it seemingly takes up no space. Now this isn't entirely accurate. Floated items will affect each other, will affect inline elements. But in this case where we have our nav and every single element is floated to the left, it doesn't have anything to take up space anymore. It doesn't have any actual positioned elements. So what we can do here is a hack, not really a hack, but it doesn't seem to make sense. So we'll set overflow to hidden, and that will force it to contain its children. So you'll find yourself doing this a lot, especially if you're using a lot of floated layouts. So now let's just go ahead and style it. So we don't want any bullets, so list style is none. Okay, and now let's go to the nav LIA, and we're going to set the color to black. And let's get rid of the underline that's added by default. So we're going to set text decoration to none. And why don't we set margin right of about 10 pixels between each one. So now we want to add that border that we tried to hack in earlier with the markup. We can simply do border right is 1 pixel solid black. Alternatively, we can change that to dotted or dashed. We'll keep it with solid. But now you see we still have one more problem. The spacing doesn't line up correctly. You see how the border, it's added immediately after the home. So you could think, oh, maybe I'll change it to padding. If we do that, you'll see, well now, because there's no margin, the padding pushes it over, but the next item begins immediately after that padding. So the trick is to divide between your padding and margin. So in this case, let's set margin right to 5 pixels to push it out. And now, let's set padding right to 5 pixels to push it away from the edge. And now you have perfect spacing between each one. That's kind of a cool little trick. This works for any amount. So if we set 25 and 25, that border will always be perfectly centered between each item. But now we have one more problem is, let's set, you see the border here at the very end of contact? Because we're setting a border right to each anchor tag, it's going to be added at the end, and that doesn't really fit. So there are more modern properties that we can implement with CSS2 and eventually CSS3. And one of those is called first and last child. These are called pseudo classes. So if I were to do nav a first child, and let's just set color to green. So now what we're doing here is we're saying get nav all of the anchor tags and then get the first child. So why don't we do this? Nav li first child, then get its anchor tag. And then you're only going to style that very first one because you're essentially saying go to the nav, then get the very first child of that nav, which is this one, then get the anchor tag and make its color green. You can also do this with last child. And that's going to style the one at the end. Now I'll warn you that this is moderately new. You can get away with this in the modern browsers. If you go back to like Internet Explorer 6, it doesn't have support for this. Now there are JavaScript files like Dean Edwards IE9.js that seemingly, not seemingly, but they bring up support for Internet Explorer 6 so that we can take advantage of these advanced selectors and properties. So here in this case, all we want to do is get the last child list item and get rid of the border, right? So let's go border, right, none, and that's going to get rid of it. And it's as simple as that. Then all you need to do is style your markup however you want. If you want to, maybe when you hover over an anchor tag, you want it to do something special, you could do nav lia. When you hover over it, we do :hover, and you could do anything you want, color green. We're not really worrying about the layout here. But now when I hover over it, it changes. Pretty cool. And that's how you create menus. And these are semantic menus because we're not just using a bunch of anchor tags one after another. We're actually creating a list of links. And if you even want to take this further and embrace HTML5, HTML5 offers a nav element. What this does is this is even more semantic because when you have a div, as far as the markup is concerned, it's just a div. But here we're specifically saying, no, this is to contain navigation, okay? And then you could do UL, something like that. And you could paste that in, and then you would just want to change nav accordingly, and you can get rid of the pound sign. And that's all there is to it. So I'm going to close this out. And now you know the beginnings of semantics. Semantics go much further, much further. Maybe if you were going to do div id equals left, we went over this just a little bit in a previous lesson. You generally don't want to do this because what if you decide that this section on the left should go on the right? Well, then you would need to edit the CSS file, but you would also need to come back here and change the ID because an element with an ID of left that's positioned all the way to the right doesn't make any sense. So instead of positioning the specifics, you want to give it an idea of more of what it is. So in this case, rather than left, you might do secondary content, something like that. And that means it's not the central content, it's the secondary content, and that doesn't mean it has to be placed on the left or right, it can be anything. And that's the semantics and list items in a nutshell.